Awesome. Hey, everyone. It is really great to be back on the next Analysis.Tech podcast. With me is my colleague in arms, Rob Koplowitz. And we are super, super pleased to be able to have Don Schuerman with us on the podcast today. And Don, thanks for being here. Really appreciate the time.
Happy to join.
Very cool. So, Don, there's probably a fair number of our audience who don't know you. They obviously know sort of the Pega name and the Pega brand, or many of them will. So it'd be great if you could just spend a little bit of time, giving us a bit of insight into your background, and then sort of lead that into, into Pega.
Sure. So I'm Pega CTO. I often say that I feel like sometimes that means Chief Translation Officer, because I feel like, especially in today's tech world, a lot of what me and my team end up doing is making sure that we've really translated what is an increasing mishmash of technology buzzwords, RPA, intelligent automation, DPA, low code, generative AI, into like, how does that actually drive value to a client, to an enterprise organization? And then also making sure we translate the other way, right? How do we make sure that we understand what our clients are trying to do, where their ambitions lie, and how do we feed that back into our roadmap to make sure we're building the right products to support them?
Yeah, and I think, Don, just before we go on, it's interesting hearing you say that, because that in some way sort of aligns really well with what we're trying to achieve here. Our goal, certainly in this podcast, in talking with you, is to kind of go beyond the marketing hype and getting a real understanding of what's happening out there, so that people can actually interpret this and say, okay, fine, I get what it means for me.
I think that's exactly right. And I think, ultimately, all of us are probably guilty sometimes of leveraging a buzzword to get people's attention, right? You kind of have to stick a little Gen AI on everything right now if you want to want to even be noticed. But the important thing is, once you've then got that attention, can we actually get to a conversation of, here's how this is relevant to you? So Pega, just so people know, Pega, we're based out of Boston, Massachusetts, home of the 2024 World Champion Boston Celtics. But we are a AI decisioning and workflow automation platform company. That's what we do. And where we really help is we help our enterprise clients really focused on the decisions and the workflows that surround their customers. So think about, how do they engage their customers? So how do they put the right offers, conversations in front of their customers to maintain loyalty, grow share of wallet, but also be relevant and personalized to what the customer wants? And how do they streamline and make easy all the workflows that help support their customers, be that onboarding, servicing, exception management, and the underlying core operations that are part of the customer and product experience for these organizations. So that's where we spend a lot of time. I'm lucky enough to have grown my career over 25 years at Pega, and kind of have always had one foot in the tech side and one foot in the go-to-market side. So that's sort of been my background.
Hey, Don, can we probe on that for just a second? Our audience loves when people just talk about, how did you end up here? How did you end up here? What brought you into this space personally?
So I graduated from college with a dual degree in physics and philosophy. So there's a degree to which I've kind of always had a little bit of right brain, left brain stuff going on in my life. And it was when I graduated in 1997, we were in one of the, I forget how many tech boom cycles have been past them, but we were in one of them. And the fact that I had earned my beer money in college working at the help desk, basically supporting laptops for professors and stuff like that, basically meant that when I left school, I had all these job opportunities to go work for tech companies, because I had an IT support background. And I ended up going into support at Pega, because they were local, they were, it seemed like an interesting place. And over time have just sort of made my way through, support into engineering. I had a side gig for many, many years doing improv comedy. And so at one point, the call went out for people in engineering who would be comfortable speaking in front of clients. And I said, well, I always like being in front of an audience, count me in. So that got me connected into sort of like the pre-sales organization. And then I started getting involved in conversations with analysts and folks like you. And that gave me a platform to start informing the overall technology strategy of the company. And next thing you know, I was being asked to run product strategy marketing and be the CTO. So, I think sometimes careers are a little bit of a drunken walk. Like you don't necessarily know where you're going to end up. But I've always just found by like just tackling whatever gets thrown in front of me and having a little bit of enthusiasm for it, I've been lucky enough to kind of end up in interesting spaces along the way.
Oh, that's so. All right. So one of the better background stories we've had. I always do love these. Philosophy, that one's unique. Physics, not unique. Stand-up comedy, definitely unique. Hey, let's pivot to Pega, because there's kind of a question that we always kind of want to throw out there in the vendor community. I don't know if you had a chance to listen to Merv Adrian and Ryan and I talk about waves and MQs, but there's sort of like this perfect fit. What is the perfect fit? So if you put yourself into the shoes of a Pega account exec walking into a net new client, they've got big initiatives.
Yeah.
What is it that you're hearing? What is that account exec hearing, he or she hearing, that says, oh, dang, this is my deal. This is what we are designed to do?
Yeah. So I think they hear, one, workflows that center around the client's customer, right? That need to operate across a variety of front-end channels. So a mix of self-service, agent-assisted, that need to oftentimes connect front and back office. So need to come in from the front end, but somehow connect and flow through into the operations side. We tend to look at and work in industries where there's a high degree of regulation, right? So they need governance, they need auditability controls. Pega comes from a background in business rules, and then later on from an acquisition we did about 10 years ago of a company called Cordian in predictive analytics, what I often refer to as left brain AI, statistical or analytical AI models. So we tend to get involved when there's a lot of rules that need to be applied in order to drive automation. So think like loan origination in banking. Like there's a lot of rules that actually get applied through that, or KYC CLM, or onboarding a new member in a healthcare plan, right? Those places we tend to get applied because they're business rules. The interesting thing from a quadrant perspective is we kind of have always sat with foots in three areas of the quadrant space. There's the what Rusty Warner calls the real-time interaction management space, which is really kind of in the marketing area, but has to do with applying decisioning in real time to optimize customer experience and customer relationships. We have a really powerful capability there. We have a really powerful capability in what used to be the BPM space, the DBA space, where that ends up in the sort of intersection of low code, RPA, et cetera. I'm very curious to see what happens there. But we have, historically been really strong in that space. And then also, because we're so customer centric, we show up in a lot of the CRM-ish things like customer service, sales automation. But really, we come at that from much more of a workflow and experience management perspective, and less from a CRM data model perspective, so to speak.
But then just to sort of add on top of that, Don, I mean, you guys have today, what I think about is sort of the Pega core automation platform. And then through, over the years, you have a customer experience capability that you talked about. For your customers today, is there still a split in who's buying what from you, or do you tend to find that those two things are kind of inextricably linked?
So the interesting thing is our clients are all big enough that they have multiple buying centers.
Right.
So we oftentimes end up talking to multiple buyers. Some of it is just because, like, some of the banks that we work with, or some of the telecommunications company we work with, they effectively operate as like 3 or 4 different companies. There's a commercial or business to business company. There's a retail company. There might be regional separations between the organizations. And then the other place that we see is, in my experience inside of organizations, the CMO marketing customer analytics space tends to be carved off pretty strongly from like the rest of the IT estate. So when we're talking about customer experience and customer engagement, we tend to be talking into the CMO, the customer experience officer, maybe the head of data and analytics with a real customer experience focus, versus, say, more of the automation side, where we tend to be either going into operational owners of business areas like customer servicing or client onboarding or regulatory compliance and adherence, or frankly through the IT organization and the CIO, who's looking at how do we standardize against workflow platforms or orchestration platforms.
Got it. And then I know we'll get more onto the AI slide in a couple of minutes or so. And I know Rob has a couple of questions there. From a sort of a platform point of view, I just wanted to make sure that both we as well as the audience here get a feel. You guys today, when we take a look at, both got your sort of Pega Infinity platform, and then more recently there's been this discussion around Pega Launchpad.
Yes.
And so can you just talk a little bit about what they are, how they differ, and what the target should be for each from your perspective?
Yeah, so the majority of our business is on Pega Infinity, and that's our core platform. That's the platform we sell directly to our enterprise clients. That's the one that shows up as, in the leading space for workflow and orchestration and decisioning. It's also the foundation, for example, of our customer decision hub, which is our customer engagement solution. It's the foundation of our CRM, our customer service and sales automation solutions. A couple of years ago, we were seeing a real drive from especially a lot of our SI partners to want to move some of their business into more and more of frankly, a SaaS space, where they wanted to take their IP and begin to actually spin that into SaaS solutions. And a lot of that we were a good fit for in terms of platform scalability, workflow, et cetera. But there are some aspects that they needed, really, especially when with regards to multi-tenancy support for them as a provider, being able to manage multiple subscribers inside of a common platform, and frankly, a different business model in terms of how they wanted to license it as a reseller versus when we're directly licensing to a client. So we created the Pega Launchpad product as a way of really targeting that audience. So we sell that into organizations that are looking to build their own SaaS solutions on top of it, and then go to take it to market themselves.
And how is that is it fairly early days still, or how is that?
I would say it's still fairly early days. I mean, it's enough that we've actually got not just providers, but subscribers live on it, but it's still fairly early days.
Okay. And do you see that being like a big part of your growth moving forward, or is it just sort of, it's something that you guys had the capability of delivering? It made sense for building more sort of, transactionalized IP on top of on top of what Pega.
Yeah, our CFO gets a little bit scared when the CTO starts talking publicly about numbers. Yeah. But we think it's a really interesting business opportunity for us.
Yeah. Cool.
So Tom, we got to talk about AI, right? Which is kind of cool to talk to you guys about AI, because I think there's sort of this whole there's a million memes going on about software companies sprinkling AI, spraying it on top and going up. But this is not your case, right? You guys have been in this for a long time. I mean, your decisioning platform, your rules decisioning platform was world class. Making world class use of AI quite a few years ago. You've invested in this across the portfolio. Can you give us a sense now of kind of where Pega's head is at in the short term? There's like tactical things that vendors are doing to bring AI into the platform immediately. And then maybe after that kind of jump forward and say, what does this crazy world look like if we start to, put on our, our flying car hats?
Yeah. So the way we've been thinking about AI and also describing it to our clients to help sort of tease it apart, right? Because I think one of the things that happens in the market right now, and especially when you get outside of the tech space and get into, the more broader media landscape, AI is just this big blob of stuff, right? Will AI take our jobs? Will AI, is AI malevolent for the state of the human race, et cetera? And it forgets that AI is not an actual single thing. It is many different technologies, most of which, frankly, the really good ones are actually pretty surgically focused on doing very specific use cases very well. And so, I often am telling clients, instead of talking about one having an AI strategy, you actually need an AI's strategy. And really what you need is a business strategy that uses the right types of AI to solve the problems you have or take advantage of the opportunities you want to attack. And so the way we've been breaking it down to help us and our clients think about it is sort of three ways in which AI gets applied. So the first, which you talked about, Rob, is what I would call left brain or statistical AI. You think about it as AI decisioning, right? So in this case, this is AI that's frankly been around for 10 years or more. It's not large language models, right? It's frankly small number models is maybe the better way of thinking about it. And clients can actually build these models on their own data. They don't need special chips. They don't need, massive armies of the highly skilled data scientists, but they can, from their own customer data, their own workflow data, they can build pretty effective predictive models. They can predict what's the best conversation that's relevant to this customer. What is likely to happen in this workflow, and how might I prevent it if it's something that's bad, like missing a regulatory deadline? And I don't think that AI goes away. In fact, the thing we're seeing is Gen AI has awakened a lot of customers to the fact that there's huge use cases for this. And it tends to be a little bit safer because the models are explainable, or at least tend to be more explainable. The data can be a customer's own data, so they're not dealing with sort of an external large language model where they worry about copyrights or other kinds of infringements. And there are techniques that have been proven over time in terms of how you test those models for bias, how you do the right things around them to make sure you're using them ethically. So that whole category of AI, and really for us, it's around how do we optimize customer experience with the next best action? How do we optimize workflows by predicting workflow events so that I can actually take appropriate steps? And how do I do things like mine data out of my workflow? So process mining, task mining, so that I can find new opportunities for improvement. So that's this one category, left brain AI decisioning. In the Gen AI space, we believe there are two ways in which it's going to get applied. The first, which I think we've seen a lot of, is what I just kind of call AI productivity tools, right? Like, I don't know, at the end of this call, my guess is the software that we're using will offer you a transcript and a summary of it, because it seems like any meeting call you have now does that for you, right? My email program will summarize my emails for the day and tell me like what the overall points of conversation were. Great, really useful tools. We've put summarization into Pega so that we can summarize a case, or we can summarize a customer's call history in a contact center. I think that's great. We've looked at using techniques like retrieval augmented generation, or what is called RAG, which basically allows you to take an organization's own knowledge repository and point a large language model at it so that you're actually centralizing the answers only on things that are based from an organization's own knowledge repository. You minimize hallucination, you get traceability. Great, really useful tool. I'm also not under the illusions that we're the only people who have a RAG-based solution in market, right? And I'm also not under the illusions that every other vendor in our space isn't going to have some degree of AI productivity, summarization, the ability to write emails for you. Awesome. I also think our clients are starting to realize that not in the same way this technology isn't going to necessarily differentiate me as a vendor, it's not going to differentiate them as an enterprise, right? The fact that your employees have email summarization and your competitors' employees have email summarization, everybody's going to get a nice productivity boost, but nobody's going to get an unfair competitive advantage for very. So AI productivity tools, great. We're investing in them. We think they drive a lot of productivity value to our clients, but we also don't think they provide sustained competitive advantage. They just help assist that rising tide of productivity. The third area is what we've been calling AI transformation. And this is around how do you actually use AI to drive design thinking, to accelerate innovation in the business. And since we tend to live in the workflow and process orchestration space, we've been looking at how do I use AI to help an organization accelerate the way they rethink or redesign their business processes. And that's a product capability that we talked a lot about at PegaWorld called Pega AI Blueprint.
So Don, let me follow up on that, if I may, Dave, because I actually want to take us in a little slightly different direction, because we go back a ways. I would like to think that I'm not a cheerleader for the vendors. I think there've probably been times when Rob Koplowitz was not the most popular name in the Pega hallways, but I'm pretty high on Blueprint. All right, I actually think this is pretty cool, and I kind of want to button it up with some other research that's going on out in the market. So a former colleague, John Bratton-Sevick, over at Forrester, is releasing some research around AI-driven platforms, and one of his contentions is this will even further encroach on the build versus buy conversation, right? Do I buy packaged applications, or do I build on top? That was always a difficult conversation, right? Because building, maintaining, defining what your processes were was difficult, and expensive to maintain, and that's shifting, and it continues to shift. And it feels like Blueprint is one of the things that causes it to shift even further, where I shrink the presence of my core business applications and build differentiated processes on top of it. And Blueprint is an interesting head start to that. And I'm wondering if that's been part of your thinking as you've gone down this path, and if it's any feedback you're getting from your customers.
Absolutely. I think we have for a long time kind of leaned a little into the build versus buy conundrum, right? Because, and I think this is frankly true of a lot of process orchestration, right? Which is, it sort of sits in between build versus buy, right? Because we're providing you with a platform. So you're not actually building some core technical capability. We're actually giving you orchestration capability, case management, in some cases, user experiences, APIs. But we are providing a platform for you to embed your own business logic, your own secret sauce, your own differentiated process designs, right? So it kind of gives you the mix of both. And what I think Blueprint does, we've always had some layer of process template that we could go to and say, hey, in some areas of the business, we have experience, whether it's loan origination or credit card disputes or appeals and grievances in healthcare. And so we can give you a kind of starting point. Well, now with Blueprint, one, we can make that starting point much richer. So it's not just the process model, it's the data models, it's the APIs that you may use, it's layouts of what user screens could look like. But it's infinite. Like I can go into any client, and I either based on our own best practices, we've had a lot of our partners inject some best practices into Blueprint, or frankly, because there's a lot of best practices just buried in the large language models themselves, we can basically take any business process in any language and give you a starting point for it. So all of a sudden, that build for buy that, we've already given you up a level on build because we've got the core process engine. Well, now I can start even a higher level up because I've got the domain expertise as a starting point. And I think that's really powerful for two reasons. One is that acceleration of the build process. But the other thing is, and I'm sure you both have experienced this, too often organizations go through big process reengineering exercises, at the end of which they've repaved the cow path. They've replatformed a broken process because that's what the people in the organization know. So it's naturally where they end up. And with Blueprint, we're able to come in from the side and suggest a new starting point, so that you're kind of injecting a little bit of design thinking, outside in thinking to the process design from the beginning. And we found that's really powerful in terms of shifting the thinking of an organization towards not how do I re-implement my existing process, but how do I optimize it for a digital customer-centric kind of world.
Yeah, I mean, I think I just make a quick comment on this. I've been fortunate enough to spend some time with Blueprint over the last couple of weeks, actually diving a bit deep. And I will say that, Rob had said to me, hey, this is really cool. You should take a good look at it. I was really skeptical at the beginning. And having dived in, it's been very interesting to kind of look at not the different use cases alone, but the different sort of scenarios in which I can apply it, and then also how it thinks about sort of guiding me through this. And I think exactly to your point, Don, there's this notion that I started to realize that on the one hand, I can think about this as I've got a problem and I need to very quickly get to a point where I've got some technology, in this case, Pega, okay, that is helping me to facilitate this automation problem that I've got. But I don't know all the details about, the Pega Dev and App Studio tooling and how to start from scratch. And I don't just want one little piece of it. I want the entire thing. And so, I can kind of take this approach that says, just guide me through this. What I really liked about it is that it guides me through it in a way that is highly collaborative. And so it is, this notion that says I could be a business person starting with this, that says at some particular point in time, fine, I've created, the initial part of this blueprint, and now I need input from other people, but in a business context, not in a technology context. And then at some point in time, when we all agree on this thing, we can turn it into something that actually can be executed, and executed in a way that people fully understand, and do that at a much, much more rapid rate than ever before. And it was also interesting because initially I was also, I mentioned I was a little skeptical. I kind of looked at this and said, well, let me just start with, I'm going to call it what I think about as your templates. I go into a vertical category, I select a solution area, I select a process area I'm focused on, and it creates all these artifacts for me. But I also started playing around with some of the broader Gen AI capabilities, and started saying, let me select the word other instead of some initial industry. And let me just start off kind of describing what I want to do and see what it builds. And it was quite surprising, I will say. Now, clearly, as you know, this is early technology. There's lots more that can go on, but it was really, really interesting going through that experience. I guess a question for me is sort of, so what's next for you guys? And where does this sort of evolve from now?
Yeah. So I think those are great insights. The other thing I would say is just, if I can permit a plug, anybody can go check this out and have the experience Dave described. It's just at pega.com/blueprint. So by all means, check it out. If you've got feedback, find me on LinkedIn and send it to me. But where we see this, and like you, we've been pleasantly surprised at how good some of the large language models are at figuring this stuff out. And frankly, at how well the output of the large language model fits into the low code structure that Pega already had in place. So we're trying to leverage that a lot. The thing that we're most interested in is, what are other things that we can put as inputs into the blueprint? So, a lot of our clients have existing workflows and processes in legacy technology, or old systems they want to retire and consolidate. Well, boy, if I could take the documentation, the screenshots, the ERDs from those systems, and input that into Blueprint, and have Blueprint use that as a starting point, so that I was building something that suggested a best practice, but was tied to some of the existing, data signatures and APIs I have to attach to. Boy, that could be a real accelerant for some of the legacy modernization that our clients are looking to do. So we're really excited about that next phase. We're also really excited about continuing to, I think in Blueprint, we still need to do a little bit more on the data side. So making sure that we're really mapped it to things like Swagger APIs and data structures, so that, because every workflow is ultimately dependent on a bunch of data and data objects. So making it really clear how that plugs in, because that also will help us accelerate the ultimate technical deployment, because we've already done a lot of the data mapping for you.
Cool. And then we just to sort of conclude this a little, we talked a little while ago, Jamuni Kuhn, on the process mining side of things. And so can you talk a little bit about, so that you guys are engaged in, you have offerings in process and task mining. How do you see those two technologies sort of aligning with the work you do on Blueprint?
Yeah. So we've been talking now for a while about this idea of what we call the autonomous enterprise. And what that means to us is actually moving from a world in which we built a lot of our systems around people, screens, front ends, and actually thinking about how do we design the systems around the work they're trying to accomplish, right? Because that's ultimately what these systems are trying to do. And then how do we build them in such a way that then they are continuously optimizing that work and those decisions towards whatever the business outcome is. And we see process mining and task mining as a huge part of that continuous optimization loop, right? So once I get a process live, how do I then make sure I understand where it's actually getting worked? Some of that work may be in Pega, some of that work may still live outside of Pega in initial phases. So how do I capture that and understand that, and then feed that back in through Blueprint, back into the process design, so I'm continuously refining it? I think one of the things that we've learned from being in the decisioning space so long is these systems work best when we don't think of them as like projects that we then deliver and move on to the next thing, but we think of decisions and workflows as living, breathing things that need to be continuously tuned and optimized and watered to make better. And so if we can use process mining and task mining as a direct, and in some cases, maybe even automated feedback loop into that optimization, that's really the vision we're trying to get our clients towards.
That'd be so cool.
I guess one last question for me. The industry is starting to talk about this idea of large action models in addition to sort of large language models. How do you think about this? Is it something that is relevant, and to what extent does it sort of play into how you consider moving forward?
Yeah, we're very much interested in sort of both actions and agents on how do we optimize some of this. So and Rob, this goes back a little bit, but for many years in the case management space, there was this concept of what used to be called sort of ad hoc cases, right? So basically being able to design a process at runtime that then would get executed. And it was always an interesting idea. To be quite honest, we had some capability there. We never saw huge client adoption of it because I think it was still a hard thing for end users to get their head around what they were doing. What's interesting to me is I think large action models and agents actually bring some of that thinking back, because now I could actually have a user, not by actually having to manually lay out an ad hoc process, but simply by telling an agent, I need you to do this. And then have the agent respond by saying, oh, here's the ad hoc process I'm about to run. I'm going to go step 1, step 2, step 1A, step 2A, step 3A, down through the process. One, now I get user validation. So I keep human in the loop. So human can say, I'm good with that. I approve it. I have automatic auditing of what my action model, my agent is doing. And by the way, if my agent gets stuck, great. It's in a business process. So it can throw it back to a human being to unstick it and then let it keep running. So we're really thinking there's a really nice intersection between some of the core case management and orchestration capabilities and these agents or large action models that everybody is starting to look at. So that's sort of where we've got a lot of work kind of running under the covers at that.
One other thing that just jumped out at me that I would like to get your comment on, you mentioned this in the beginning, explainable AI. I've seen too often that people sort of look at this and they end up being these black boxes. They do certain things, and where something doesn't quite come up as expected, you have no idea why.
Yeah.
So do you think that this explainable AI thing is going to become a bigger and bigger topic?
So this is where I think the concept of different types of AIs are really important. We can make left brain statistical AI quite explainable. Like, we have clients who use this for things like risk analysis, right? You can't do a risk calculation as a bank and not actually have that be explainable. The other thing that's really important about statistical AI is it's deterministic. So you ask the model a question 3 times, you get the same answer. So on that side of the covers, like, we know how to do it, and like we're continuing to drive down it. On the generative AI side, I kind of have 2 thoughts, maybe 3 thoughts there. There are some techniques like RAG that minimize the effect of hallucination. I think for things like specific use cases like knowledge research, using Gen AI basically to do more advanced search, I think that's really useful. Secondly, I think there are some cases where what you want to do is you actually want to exploit the fact that the model is not deterministic, right? So like, one of the great things about Blueprint is if you don't like the process it suggests, you can just ask it again. And it's kind of like this sort of innovation partner that you can throw an idea at, see what it does. Oh, you don't like that? Great, I'm going to change and throw it back, see what else you come up with. Like, it becomes a brainstorming tool. And I think that's actually fine, especially if you keep a human in the loop. The third thing is, there is research going on around trying to figure out the explainability of these large language models. You know, Anthropic just published some stuff that's pretty interesting. And the thing that this got me thinking about is, and one of the things I studied, maybe this brings us all the way back to the beginning, but I did my undergraduate thesis in the history and philosophy of science. And we always tend to think sometimes that there's this like linear progression of like, we do science, and then based on the science, we do some engineering to figure out the practical use of the thing. Where in the real world, it actually often works the other way around. We had penicillin long before we had the cellular biology that explained how penicillin worked. And there's part of me that thinks we're in one of those moments where we have large language models. We have we know they do, they're really good at translating stuff. We know that. We don't actually know yet how they translate the stuff.
Yeah.
But actually, I think the history of science shows us that even in those cases, often the science catches up with the engineering. And I think this is sort of like penicillin. The engineering is a little ahead of the science right now, but I do believe we'll get there.
Yep. Fantastic. Rob, I'm not sure if this has been a super, super interesting discussion.
Loved it.
You know, as
Great
always.
session.
And you know, catching up with you in person, Don, at the conference was awesome. You know, look forward to some further interaction, as Rob mentioned earlier. It's been awesome. Thank you again for the time. Really appreciate it.
Really appreciate it, guys. Thank you.
Hey, Don, get one good gloat out of the way before we leave.
Oh,
You're the champs.
oh yeah.
Thank you all.
Thanks
All right,
so
guys.
much for coming on, Don.